Welcome to Green Dot Daily, live every weekday at 3 Eastern on the Action app and YouTube. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. I'm Maria Marino, and coming up on the show, MLB Bets with Sean Zerillo, plus Gilles Gallant stops by with NBA props, but we start with reaction to Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals. And after a couple games where the Wolves struggled to close, Karl-Anthony Towns scored 20 of his 25 points in the second half to help his team stay alive. Anthony Edwards had 29, 10, and 9. And much like he did in the last round against Denver, was telling folks in Dallas they'd be seeing him again.
You told somebody in the hallway you'll see him for Game 6. Where does that confidence come from?
What am I supposed to say? I'm supposed to say we're going to lose Game 5? No, I'm not going to never say that. Michael Parsons, you know, he was rocking the AE1s, and I told him he wears size 14. I'll bring back some nice shoes for Game 6. That's what I told him.
Time for more money with Matt Moore and Jay Money. All right, as we look at the series pricing, let's start there. Wolves were at 14-1 on Tuesday to win this series. Now that they've extended the series, they're at plus 425, and the Mavs are at minus 550. Matt, what do you make of all that?
Yeah, so we're looking at about, an 11 percentage point differential in the implied, from 18% to win the series from 7%, right? So that's like a pretty massive jump. Something to keep in mind here is that the Wolves have a pretty huge liability at the books. The books have a huge liability on the Wolves, I should say. They have just simply taken on so much money on the Wolves throughout the regular season when the Wolves were the 1 seed and the 2 seed. And then they took on more really in that Denver series. And so they have this huge kind of liability. And we've seen that reported across most of the books here in the US. And so I do think that there's like a pretty big liability, and that's guiding a lot of why this moves so much, because they still had that liability before Game 4, obviously. However, the idea of them coming back started to kind of percolate. You started to see like a little bit of conversation of like, well, look, the Wolves have been in these games. It has been close. And so the books are basically saying, we don't want any more Wolves money. We do not like this price at plus 450 for a team down 3-1 when no one has ever come back from 3-0. That is saying we don't want any more Wolves money. That price is way too short. So the value is not really there. So that to me is kind of how to read this, is that this is mostly a reaction from the books based off of their current liability and the fact that they are not interested in taking on any more money on the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Well, speaking of how long this series could go, Jay, when do you see this series ending? Is Ant right? Is he going to see people again in Dallas? How many games do you think this goes?
Well, they will be back in Dallas. That's something I do think. I think it'll maybe go 6 games, but it all matters about Derek Lively, in my opinion. Like, if he comes back in the next game, for Game 5, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mavs did win that game, but it maybe looks like Lively is still a little banged up. Like, he didn't even want to stand up too much in for Game 4 over there. So if Lively's still out, I do think it goes to at least 6 games. But if the Mavs were to win this series, I wouldn't see them losing Game 6 at the house. They know that would be basically games like, you don't want to go to Minnesota for Game 7. I know that Minnesota was able to win in Denver for Game 7, but I don't think this series, especially after starting off 3-0, I think whenever Lively comes back, if he comes for Game 6, that's where the series will end. It's really that simple to me.
Game 6 to me is too easy. It's too, Minnesota fans don't get off that easy. It's got to be more torturous. It's got to be more painful. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say Game 7 here. I think that it's Game 7 and then the Mavericks win. Like, the Mavericks did this to the Suns a couple of years ago, winning in Phoenix. Jay, like, when you look at some of the numbers, I will say we're kind of seeing this weird pattern, right? Like, Dallas in 2022 goes on the road and absolutely stomps the Suns in Game 7. Minnesota goes down by 20, comes back and wins in Denver. Last year, the Celtics forced Game 7 back in Boston and the Heat blow them out. I'm starting to get a little concerned about what is a small sample, but overall trend here for teams at home in Game 7. Game 7 home teams used to be a lock, and now I'm a little bit more worried about it. I will say the Wolves have been in every game in this series with a chance to win. I love Dallas in this series going in. I gave them out, bet them. I have minus 1.5 and straight up plus 140. However, the longer this series goes, Minnesota's getting a little bit better at the matchups. They're moving in the right direction. And the Mavericks, I don't necessarily know that they have a lot of things that they can do to tweak and counter and go that the other way, because I'm not sure that the things that Jason Kidd did versus the Clippers, say, playing Maxi Kleber next to one of the bigs. I don't think that works versus this two big lineup for the Wolves. That plays more into Minnesota's hands. Game 4 was the first game in the series that was in Minnesota's kind of wheelhouse. It was a defensive game. For as much as everyone talks about, well, Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards played better, they did. But the Mavs had a 105 defensive rating. That's where the Wolves want this series. In the prior games, the Mavs were averaging about a 117 to 120 offensive rating in each game. As much as Dallas's defense has improved, that's where they want this. They need this to be an offensive series. Minnesota needs it defensive. And we see in these series, when they go longer, we see the totals start to come down because they do get more grinded out. The Mavs need to wrap this up because I am a little bit concerned if you let this go with how Minnesota is adapting, that's going to be a problem. I agree with Jay that Derek Lively is a huge factor in the series. He's been great in every series. He has the best, I think the second best plus minus of any rookie in NBA playoff history, which is phenomenal. But the Mavs are also getting killed in Daniel Gafford's minutes, and they've gotten some outlier performances from him in the last 2 games. If that starts to just tilt a little bit, if Lively comes down a little bit in his impact and Gafford stays where he is, that leans more into the Wolves. Again, not saying I'm like rushing out to bet Minnesota here at all, because nobody's ever come back from 3-0. But I do think there's a possibility this thing goes 7 before the Wolves finally Minnesota themselves.
Well, I do feel like a 7-game series would be fitting for the Wild West of this season. But just to be clear, Matt, real quick, you're not saying there's a chance that Minnesota actually wins this thing.
No one's ever done it. Like, no one's ever done it. And like, look, I was on Mavs in game 4. My profile picture on Twitter is currently a Mavs fan that she took photo that she took with Jaden McDaniels, because I was like, they're done tonight. She's like, you want to bet? And I was like, all right, we'll do profile pictures. No one's ever done it. Beating Dallas 4 in a row. I don't think Dallas is this elite team that everyone seems to think that they are. I think they're a really good team. And I don't think you're beating a good team 4 straight times, twice in Dallas. I can't get there. So I think whether it's game 5, game 6, or game 7, I just can't see Minnesota pulling this off.
Now, Jay, if this series continues to extend, how much of an advantage does that give to Boston in the NBA Finals?
I think it would be a huge advantage. So the Celtics are coming off. I mean, each one of their series have been pretty easy. Each one of the Mavs and the Wolves, well, maybe not the first series for the Wolves, but if it is the Mavs that get it done, which they should get it done. If they are, I mean, they've went both of their series have won at least 6 games versus the Clippers and versus the Thunder. And if they go another 6 or 7 games versus the Wolves here, they're gonna be a lot more gas going up against a Boston team that's been the best team all year. They're rested, they're ready to go. They'll probably have Porzingis back, ready to go as well. So it'll be a major advantage for the Celtics, in my opinion.
Yeah, for me, this gets into more kind of, we look at series script, right? So teams that are at home and they have a rest advantage over the opponents. They've gotten more rest than the opponent in the NBA Finals for game 1 and are at home. They're 8-2 in those finals games 1. This is just 10 games, but 8-2 is a pretty big gap there. That's 80%, 8 out of 10 times they've gone on to win game 1. Well, guess what? Teams that win game 1 of the NBA Finals at home have gone on to win 78% of the time via whowins.com. So this is, to me, is part of the problem. If the Mavs want to pull off this upset versus the Celtics, they need to steal game 1. Game 1s have not been strong for the Mavericks. They've lost 2 of the 3. They did beat the Wolves, but they've lost 2 of the 3 matchups in the NBA playoffs. If you get behind, I think, versus Boston, I think it gets really tough. Even if they come back and they steal game 2, like the Heat did, like the Cavaliers did, Boston has kind of proven that they will wake up and still be able to handle it. I don't think Dallas can look at this and go, we'll win both at home, because Dallas hasn't been good in these playoffs at home either. Like, they've lost more games at home than they have on the road. So if we look at those kind of factors here, that's where this rest disadvantage kind of comes into play, where if this, especially, look, if it's 5, I don't think it matters. Like, that's Thursday. You're still talking a week that the Mavericks get off in order to get healthy, get right, get rested. That, to me, kind of negates a lot of this. But if this goes to 6 or 7, now we're talking about an exhausting series, especially if this goes 7. That's a disaster for anybody that's been betting against Boston, because teams tend to lose those subsequent series, and Boston will have had all this time off. One thing I do want to say, though, we're probably going to hear about this. I don't want to hear about Boston being over the rest versus rust thing. They have been rested every single round of the playoffs and they've lost twice. Like, I just think that we need to probably give Boston a little bit of credit for they have breezed through the season and managed themselves very well. If they lose game one, it's because Boston's not good enough, not because of the rest versus rust factor.
I'm not making any promises that that won't come up, but I will just say we have seen living proof in this postseason. Minnesota, that 7-game series against Denver, absolutely drained them every which way. They didn't have time to wrap their heads around, okay, we still got another team left to play here. And then also the Pacers, like the Pacers were completely like, they were okay in game one. I get that against Boston, but like that 7-game series against the Knicks absolutely came back to haunt them. Okay. Talking game 5 tomorrow. Jay, what's your best bet?
Yeah, I like Kyrie Irving under 23.5 points. It is a small play for me, but obviously going under with anybody at points, especially with the Mavs having a lot better offense in this series, is a little bit scary. But the Wolves made a really nice defensive adjustment for Game 4. It's something that they should have probably did after Game 2, in my opinion. They put Anthony Edwards on Luka, and they put Jaden McDaniels on Kyrie. Really bothered Kyrie out there. He only went, he was held to 6 of 18 for shooting for 16 points as well. A lot of people say he had a bad game. I don't think it was on Kyrie. It was on Jaden McDaniels. This guy is a tall, lengthy type of guy, and it really bothered Kyrie over there as well. So a ton of more size to on Kyrie there is making it a lot harder for him. And I'll take a shot with his under 23.5 points. It's my best bet for Game 5.
Maria, can I just say real quick? I'm not betting absolutely anything on this game. I have zero idea. I don't want any part of this game.
I'm with you.
Jay's been rock solid on props in the NBA playoffs, as he always is with all of his bets. So like that's a good play. I am terrified of this game. I have zero idea of what to expect. I do not know how this one's gonna go.
Fair enough. I will say this on the Jaden McDaniels point. I could be wrong. I don't think I heard him say anything about the fact that he was going to be guarding Kyrie. Unlike Anthony Edwards, I'm not saying he was even trying to talk trash or anything. He was just like, yeah, I want to guard Kyrie, and didn't work out so great. But Kyrie did look totally different in game 4 with the 16 points, averaged almost 28 points across the first 3 games. All right, Jay, Matt, thank you.
Thank you.
Anytime.
To baseball, and these are the latest odds to win American League MVP. Juan Soto and Bobby Witt Jr. top the list at plus 300. They're tied for 5th in the majors in hits and are both batting above 300, followed by Aaron Judge at plus 350, Gunnar Henderson at plus 450, and Kyle Tucker at plus 650. Tucker leads the majors with 18 homers. Judge and Henderson are tied for 2nd with 17. As we welcome Sean Zerillo back to the show, what are your thoughts so far on AL MVP?
Yeah, quite a race we have going so far, and we'll see ultimately if Judge and Soto stay healthy through the season, but ultimately if they end up taking votes away from one another. I've done some research in the past with regards to teammates finishing in the top 10, top 5 for MVP voting, and it does seem like when you have 3 teammates who are in the top 10, they may end up stealing votes from each other, but it is largely inconclusive whether they do end up hurting one another in the voting. The best player does tend to win the MVP award, and the way voters typically quantify the best player is by wins above replacement. 26 of the past 28 MVP award winners ranked in the top 3 in their respective leagues in wins above replacement. 19 of those 28 players were their league leader in wins above replacement. So WAR preseason projections, very important for me for looking at this award. In-season updated projections, very important for me looking at this award. And Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, in terms of the updated in-season projections, the updated end-of-season projection, are tied at 8 wins above replacement. Gunnar Henderson, 7.5. Bobby Witt, 7.2. Kyle Tucker, 7.2. So you see a little bit of a gap between Judge and Soto and the rest of the competition. But I think it is worth noting that Witt is currently 2nd in wins above replacement behind Mookie Betts. And since the All-Star break last year, he's also 2nd behind Betts, 7.2 versus 6.8 in wins above replacement. Juan Soto is the closest player to them at 6.1. So I think Bobby Witt continues to be underrated. He's great on both sides of the baseball. The one thing and the one argument or knock I would make against him and maybe against Gunnar Henderson, first off, corner outfielders or corner infielders and outfielders tend to win the award more often. That's because they have a higher OPS ranking or OPS in general relative to these middle infielders. And OPS after WAR is probably the most important stat for judging MVP selection. Right now, Aaron Judge first, Kyle Tucker second in terms of OPS in the American League. So keep an eye on the offensive performance. The shortstops get a little bit of a positional adjustment, a little bit of a positional bump because they play a more difficult position. But I do think voters keep that in mind, and they tend to go with the more offensively oriented players. So would probably handicap Judge as the favorite right now. And considering he's the third choice on the board, he may be the value pick among the three, but he has mentioned that he has a toe injury that he's going to continue to have to manage. So a very exciting AL MVP race. I do have some Bobby Witt preseason though, so hopefully he's the one who comes through in the end.
How nice for the Yankees that they have not one, but two front runners in this race. And interesting note about Bobby Witt Jr., he would be the first Royal since George Brett in 1980 to win the award if he were to win it. Okay, who would be your long shot to keep an eye on in this race?
Jose Ramirez, he's a guy I bet every season pretty much to win the AL MVP at 25-1 or better, and typically projects within that top 5 group for end of season AL WAR leaders. And looking back at recent seasons, struggled last year. He finished 12th in the American League, but he was first in both 2020 and 21. He was 5th in 2022 in terms of wins above replacement. He's just sort of on the cusp of that OPS guideline that I recommended before. So basically every MVP in recent memory has had an OPS of 850 or higher, except for Ichiro when he won in his rookie year in the early 2000s. Ramirez is right on that cusp for his career. He's sitting at 855 for his career. He's in the 880s currently. He's been closer to 1,000 in the past, but I think that OPS just being a little bit below the other hitters is what's going to detract him in voters' minds. Does lead the American League or leads all of baseball in RBI at the moment, and he's the best player on one of the teams who's surprising more than any other this season, the Guardians. The one thing I do want to note, though, just about Jose, watching him on a day-to-day basis, what makes him so impressive is the long at-bats. He's really good at grinding pitchers down, getting into these 9, 10, 11 pitch at-bats where he keeps fouling pitches off, and then he does damage on the 13th, 14th pitch. A lot of these guys get into long at-bats and then hit a weak ground ball or strike out or take a walk, grind out a walk eventually. Jose eventually does damage when he gets into those long at-bats, and nobody I enjoy watching more at the moment fighting off pitches in a long at bat than Jose Ramirez. Seems like he always comes through once it gets past 5-6 pitches.
And as you can see, Ramirez at plus 3,000 right now on MGM. Okay, let's talk picks for today at 4:10 Eastern. We have the Mets hosting the Dodgers, and you like the home team in this spot.
Yeah, don't love the Mets because they have broken my heart several times over the past week. They keep blowing saves, and I was not on them on Sunday when they blew a save for the Giants and had a 3-run ninth inning comeback of their own. So can't manage to be on the Mets on the right days this year, but we are going to be able to attack two pitchers who I do not like today. The first of them being James Paxton. Paxton has a 3.5 ERA this year, but his expected ERA is about 2 runs higher, closer to 5.5. His velocity is down nearly 2 ticks year over year. When he came back for Boston last year, he had missed significant time with injury. Came back throwing 96, 97 miles an hour, in line with the upper end of his career averages, but it's just slowly dipped with each subsequent start. His strikeout minus walk rate was about 25% over the first 9 starts when he came back last year. It dipped closer to 12%, which is below the major league average over the second half of his season. And now into this season, as many walks as strikeouts, 28 walks, don't have the exact number, but as many walks as strikeouts, 0% strikeout minus walk rate. And as I said, with the velocity dip, his stuff plus has also declined significantly, going from 89 to 74. So been really lucky in terms of straining runners, in terms of batted balls not turning into base hits. Both of those should regress and revert to his career averages respectively. And I think there is some upside for David Peterson of the Mets as well. This is a guy who pitched through a hip injury all of last year, really struggled relative to his previous numbers, but has above average metrics for his career and really dominated in his minor league rehab stint. Got about 6 outings prior to getting the call for the start today. So like the David Peterson, had extensive rehab time and looked really sharp into it prior to coming back today. And he's not just jumping off of the IL and jumping into a major league start like Blake Snell did earlier this season. He actually had sufficient rehab time.
Well, the Mets have lost the last 2, trying to avoid the sweep and also avoid breaking Sean's heart. And your second pick involves the Yankees. They're out west for game 2 against the Angels.
Yeah, another pitcher who's beat me up quite a bit this season and broken my heart quite a number of times, even though I consistently get CLV against him, and the market seems to recognize that he's overachieving. Tyler Anderson of the Los Angeles Angels, again, very similar to James Paxton, a very low batting average on balls in play and a very high strand rate relative to his career averages. 209 batting average on balls in play, 285 for his career. That's pretty close to the Major League average of 289. And then a 72% career strand rate. He's at 85% this season. The strikeout minus walk rate, the pitch mix, the pitch modeling metrics, all the same as they were last season with the Angels. He's just getting lucky. He's stranding runners that are getting on base, and he's avoiding hits on balls that are put into play. But the StatCast metrics, the quality of batted balls, the strikeout and walk numbers all suggest that he should be about 2 runs worse than he's actually been to date. And I think Luis Gil is in a very interesting and exciting arm for the Yankees, stepping up in place of Garrett Cole. He has elite stuff plus numbers, 114 stuff plus, and his command continues to get better with every single start. His location plus numbers have been climbing steadily throughout the season, but he's very nasty pitches. And if he just maintains average command, he's going to be a frontline starter. So Luis Gil, 2.8 expected ERA this season, has been a little bit luckier than that to have an ERA in the low 2s, but has pitched like an upper echelon starter. And Tyler Anderson, to me, is still a replacement level pitcher. So a very big gap over the first 5 innings of this matchup. It does close over the course of the full game, but if you can get the Yankees minus 180 for the full game, happy with that. Would prefer their first 5 line, though, up to about minus 205.
Yankees continuing to hang in there without Garrett Cole healthy and looking to snap a 2-game losing streak. Sean Zerillo, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Back to the NBA, the T-Wolves Game 4 win ensured that we get at least one more showdown between Luka Doncic and Anthony Edwards. Here's how their numbers stack up this postseason, both averaging about 28 points per game. Luka racking up 9 assists per game compared to 6.5 for Ant. Luka all over the boards with 9.6 per game. Ant getting about 7, and Ant shooting a bit better from the field, almost 48%, as opposed to about 43% for Luka. It's 3 p.m. somewhere, so time to bring in Gilles Gallant for his best bet on 3-pointers made. Gilles, who do you like to get going from downtown on Thursday?
Yeah, Maria, I don't think we need to look too much farther than Luka Doncic. I'm going to take his over 3.5 3-point prop. It's around minus 115 to minus 120. So with Luka, like he's hit this in 3 or 4 games in the series, and 5 of the last 6 playoff games overall. I think that's important to mention because, Maria, if you remember when we first started covering the playoffs with Luka, we were kind of fading him, fading his 3-point props, fading his points, rebounds, and assists combo props. But now, where we only have 3 teams left in the playoffs, he's one of the few players left who I know is going to take consistent 3-point volume. So he averages 9.8 3-point attempts per game in these playoffs over a 16-game sample size. That's second in the entire NBA behind Damian Lillard for all playoff 3-point attempts. And that's pretty consistent for what he's done in his career in the playoffs. He averages 9.6 3-point attempts per playoff game in his career with a 44-game sample size. And I keep stressing the volume, Maria. In the playoffs, when he takes 10 or more 3-point shots, he's hit this in 6 of 9 games so far. So I would rather bank on a 3-point prop from someone like Luka as opposed to, say, like Kyrie Irving or Derek White or Jason Tatum, where just they're not very consistent with their aggression from the 3-point arc. And also just being a closeout game makes, I think, Luka a little more dangerous as well, because in 9 playoff closeout games in his career, that's where the series could essentially be decided. He's averaging 10.8 3-point shots per game in his career, and he's hit this in 6 of those 9 games. So I think Luka is the guy that you want to bet on 3-point props for this. It's either an over or you don't bet it, because I'm not ready to say the Mavs close out the T-Wolves in game 5, but barring injury, I know Luka's going to show up, and I know that he's going to take the volume we need. So if he goes for 1 for 10, like he did in game 6 against the Clippers, I mean, you almost just have to do your hat tip with that and just kind of live with the result.
Yeah, absolutely. The touches are going to be there. He's not afraid to chuck it from deep. And I do remember talking about him struggling a bit more earlier in the playoffs. And in fact, he shot 24% from deep in round 1. But in the last 2 rounds, he's a little bit more respectable, over 39%. Now, what else are you betting in game 5?
Yeah, I'm going right to another superstar, but not for a 3-point prop. I'm actually just going to go to Anthony Edwards, and we're going to continue to ride this rebound prop. So I'm going to take over 6.5 rebounds. He's hit this in 3 or 4 games in the series, but 18 rebound chances in game 4, Maria. He ended up finishing with 9 rebounds. That's on top of having 17 rebound chances in game 3. He had 15 rebound chances in game 1. So there's plenty of opportunity for him to get rebounds. I also would say in game 4, he did finish with 9 rebounds. He played 40 minutes in that game, but probably would have played more if he didn't get into foul trouble there in the 3rd quarter. And another factor that to consider with Anthony Edwards is this Timberwolves defense and the way that they're adjusting, because coming into the series, we thought Anthony Edwards is going to be at the point of attack. He's going to be guarding up against Kyrie Irving. Well, that hasn't worked out. So they needed to move Edwards off of Kyrie Irving defensively. Now he's actually kind of being more like the low man in the pick and roll defense and guarding Derek Jones Jr. and closing out on his 3-point attempts in the corners. Well, that's putting him closer to the rim, which as a result is giving him more rebound chances. So in an elimination game here, where I probably expect him to play at least 44 minutes, I'm going to bank on Ant-Man just to continue to be aggressive in the paint instead of launching 3-pointers, because his 3-point prop is it's over under 2.5. It's a little steamed to the over. He might have the volume there. He might not, depending on what the Mavs give him and the way they have been defensively. So instead, I'd rather just bank on him being very active in the paint and taking over 6.5 rebounds.
I like this idea of Minnesota getting back to that mantra of being hungry wolves. And I think that applies to everything in terms of being more aggressive. Ant Edwards being in the paint, him trying to fight for rebounds, and he's averaging 2 more rebounds per game in this series than he is for the postseason as a whole. Gilles, thank you for stopping by.
Thanks a lot, Marie. We'll talk again soon.
And remember, any picks we give out here on the show, you can easily reference by following Green Dot Daily in the Action app. We keep track so you don't have to. And that's all for Green Dot Daily. I'm Maria Marino. Thank you so much for watching. The show is back tomorrow at 3 Eastern on the Action app and YouTube channel.